Today I'm going to show you how to nail the kick and bass relationship in a metal mix. It took me quite a few years to figure this out. I actually used to start out by making my bass the most subby information in a metal mix. But I realized that the kick actually should have the most sub because there's a lot of moments where there will be no instruments except for drums, and then you notice that your mix kind of sounds like, to be honest, dog shit. And it's because there's no low end information. Low end information will really make or break your mix. So without further ado, let's jump in. These are the plugins that I have on my mix bus chain. I apparently forgot to put a multi-band compressor on this specific mix, but usually I do multi-band compressor first, then I do the SPL iron, which is my mix bus compressor. Then I have the Auto Audio More is More plugin just to shape my mix a little bit more, to add a bit of saturation and to clip those high transients. And then I go right into my FabFilter Pro L2 just to limit it. If you want like a dedicated video on what I do for my mix bus, let me know in the comments down below. I'll be sure to make that. So let me solo the kick. So basically I have three little EQs going on here. The first one is Basement by Plugin Alliance. You can just use an EQ to do this, but I really like what it's doing in saturating the low end. I have it in overfold, and basically all the frequencies in 83 and under are getting boosted by 12%. I really like having all of my sub information, or the majority of my sub information, in the kick drum, just because that's going to be the biggest impact. Your bass is like kind of carrying all the information from your guitars, so you don't really want it to be the biggest impact in the sub frequencies. The kick is obviously more percussive, so every time it goes off, you're getting that low end boost. That's where I've noticed that my mixes have really come to life. So this is it without the basement. You probably heard a pretty drastic difference there. Let me show you again. To me, that's night and day, and that's where my mixes really come to life, having that low frequency coming out. And then next up, I basically have an EQ just to kind of shape everything a bit more, cutting out the slightest bit of like 800 hertz. Just doing a little bit more shaping, obviously adding a little more top end just to make it a little clickier. And then I have the Sound Toys SiQ, which is another EQ, and I guess basically just adding more clickiness. And then after that, I just have a distressor, basically just shaping up the kick a little bit more. If you want to watch like a whole tutorial about how I mix drums, check out this one right here. With my bass, I always separate it into two different tracks, my low end track and like my jangle track basically. And it's the exact same bass performance, just copied and pasted. The first one is really just sub. I'm using the Dark Glass plugin. I really like the Dark Glass or the Parallax, kind of go in between. If I'm gonna use only one bass track, I use Parallax because you can shape it really well. If I'm gonna use two different bass tracks for my low and my high, I usually use a Dark Glass. I just really like the way it sounds. And then I'm literally just cutting everything except for 150 and lower. So that's my first track. My second track is just my jangler. Same thing, it's just the Dark Glass. And then going into an EQ where I'm basically cutting out everything from 160 lower. You might be thinking what I often think to myself, which is that track sounds good on its own, why don't I only use that as my bass track? The reason why I like to separate things is not really for sound quality, it's more so because specific parts in a song, you want more top end information on your bass. Like sometimes say there's like feedback and it's just a good bass part, or there's no guitar and it's just a bass part. You'll notice that I already have some automation going on in this jangle track, the high track here. I find it way easier to just automate the volume of the jangle track than it is to go into your EQ and automate a specific frequency at a specific point in the song. I just like having the control to be like, okay, this part of the song, I want more sub. This part, there's enough sub, I want more high end. And it's just a lot easier and I think a little bit more efficient to do it this way. One quick thing before I move on, you'll see that I have a Saturn II plugin here. I picked up this trick from a recent Joey Sturgis video where he uses Tominator to basically remove some of the noise from chugs. I don't have Tominator, but I have Saturn, so I basically did the exact same technique. You'll notice, especially on this note where it's held out, there's a lot of noise because I'm using the Squier Bass 6 for both the guitar and the bass. And since there's single coil pickups that I'm using for the bass track, I usually use the neck pickup. There's a lot of noise, if you can hear that. So I'm basically using Saturn to clean that up a bit before the amp itself. There's still a little bit of noise, but way less. All you really have to do for that, if you have Saturn, just make a secondary frequency somewhere. This is a nollie trick that he uses for snare gating. Yeah, you make a secondary track there, which is going to be your high end, and then you go to dynamics and you just roll it down. And you just find a point where you're cutting enough of it. So let's find where that frequency starts, basically. And I don't want to cut out too much of the high end because that's what I'm using this track for. If you find that you have that issue and you have Saturn, do that. If you don't, Tominator is another fucking plugin, I don't know. So let's hear the bass on its own. So I group those two tracks together, and then I have all these plugins over here. So let's go one by one. I never really listen to things in solo when I'm mixing, but just for today's video, I'm just gonna show you what it sounds like on its own. So I'm using Pultec just to shape the bass quite a bit more. I'm using the FabFilter Pro Q just to cut out. I notice there's always some sort of frequency around 150 to like 250 hertz in the bass that's just like, it's not adding anything and it's actually just taking away. So I usually just take that away. You won't even notice it until you have it in the track. If you want a dedicated video about how I actually mix a full track, check out this video right here. I'm not going to go into specifics because it's really about the bass and the kick relationship. And then I just have a compressor here just to glue it all. Then I have a secondary compressor, the Teletronics. I really like the LA2A for bass. You can really like push it and it doesn't sound like it's being heavily compressed. And then possibly the most important plugin that I have on my bass track is Track Spacer. It's basically a multi-band compressor with only one purpose, sending sidechain information to it to duck at a certain frequency. So I have my kick sent to Track Spacer. Every time the kick goes off, you'll see everything from 83 hertz and below is getting ducked by 7% in volume. What this is doing is still allowing my bass to be that wall of low end that my track needs, but every time the kick goes off, that sub information in the kick is what pops through because the sub information in the bass is getting lowered. And it doesn't really sound like it's doing much, but once it's hitting compression, mixed bus compression specifically, since low end is the first thing to get compressed, you're really saving yourself a lot of effort here. And you can really push it, so let's really push it so you can see what it's doing. I wouldn't go too far with it, both in volume or in frequency. Just cut out the sub frequencies that are in your track. And then you'll notice since there's no kick there, the sub frequencies are just swelling up a little bit just to fill out the mix. This is definitely the most important plugin. If you don't have Track Spacer or you don't have the money to buy it, I believe that every DAW comes with a compressor of some sort or a multiband. What I would do if you don't have a multiband that you can sidechain to, just throw on a compressor. I use Ableton, so I don't know what you're gonna have to do in your DAW. I just click sidechain, choose kick, and then here, usually you want to go ratio like infinity or something really high, just so that it's like every time the kick happens, this is doing it. And then just dial in. I put the attack really fast, that way as soon as the kick happens, the bass gets ducked, and then release to taste. The downside with using a compressor, obviously, is that since it's not a multiband compressor, we're not able to choose which frequencies get ducked. It's just the whole bass track. But if you don't have the money to buy one of those plugins, and if your multiband compressor doesn't have that option, this is still a good option, and it's better than not doing anything, in my opinion. And that's it. I got nothing else for you, so if you have any further questions, if this didn't make sense, or if you have any... just let me know in the comments if you got further questions, alright? Thank you so much. If you want to see a whole tutorial on how I mix metal music, check out this thing right here. It's basically an hour long. I just go through in real time. There's no cuts. If I made a mistake talking, it's in there. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Please don't unsubscribe.